I wanted to say, I just had some guy a few moments ago reach out and say, dude, you just need to give it up. People can't be helped. Just save yourself. And it kind of got to me. I just wanted to say, this is the opposite of the spirit that we all need to have right now.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine. And I do welcome you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. As asked for, today I have with me Christian Westbrook, the Ice Age farmer. We're going to discuss crop losses, distraction in the media, censorship in the media, and a blueprint moving forward with what you can expect with your food prices, how this is going to tear apart the consumer spending economy. You can find more information at iceagefarmer.com. Also, he has the Ice Age Farmer wiki page where he maintains a real-time crop loss map. It's a click and go. He'll explain a little more about that to you as we move forward. You can follow along with the information we're talking about tonight in some of the media sources. Also, a volcanic eruption on Mars occurring at the same time. So this is an electric universe we're living in, electromagnetic effects across all the planets. All the planets are seeing some sort of global warming, if you will, happening. So Christian, I welcome you. I know a lot of people have been waiting to hear us have this conversation, and I will leave the floor open with you.
Well, thank you, David. I'm honored and humbled to be here. It's a pleasure. You really had to look and sort of be clever to put together these signs and maybe discern here and there, put that together over here, what's going on. But this last 6 months or so, it's just been so in your face with a 40% vegetable shortage, the crisis in the EU. We just saw $3 billion worth of crops of lost in Canada. That was basically entire regions of going offline. Germany going from a net exporter to a net importer of grains. So some seismic shifts in production. It's plain that something is going on now, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I would follow up with that as well. That 6 months ago seems that it was a definite twist and a ramp up in the intensification of all weather events, crop losses included. But now when you see these rain events, it's 6 months worth of rain in 3 hours. And we just saw another one of those events, a year worth of rain in Oman in 6 hours. So everything you're looking at, the drought intensification, where the drought stones in Hungary and the old, what was called the former Czech lands, we're starting to see these events across the planet. South Africa's going off the line due to political consequences. And, where does it take us from here? Because we eat every day, and this is the reason I do my channel, and I know that's to follow a lot of these crop losses. Food is the utmost important thing to keep our society together. And it seems right now it's starting to unravel.
Actually, if you look at modern agriculture, it has for a long time been thoroughly unsustainable. So to some extent, there's a silver lining to that cloud. But, I wanted to say, I just had some guy a few moments ago reach out and say, dude, you just need to give it up. People can't be helped. Just save yourself. And it kind of got to me. I just wanted to say, this is the opposite of the spirit that we all need to have right now. We have, for one, I have heard from people on a regular basis who are now growing their own food and who are now living the life that they dreamed of, but they needed some impetus to change their patterns. And I think this, for many people, provides that impetus. If you're waiting to make a shift into the life that you want to live, where you're self-sufficient and making the things that you need, then I think this is a great reason to do that. So for one, that guy's just wrong, and then but also and more broadly, these times demand of us all that we are all doing our part right now. I think we all need to work together, and we're all in this together, certainly, to get through what's going on. There's just much more in play than we could possibly discuss in the next 2 hours, even if we tried real quick.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, TrueLeafMarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
I'm challenging everyone out there to change your patterns and really embrace what we're going on to. But yeah, you're right. The crop losses have been mounting, and I did create it's map.iceagefarmer.com. So folks who are listening to the radio now can cruise over there and sort of get a picture of what we're talking about and the extent to which these crop losses are spread out throughout the world. There are some of the more recent ones that I haven't gotten to yet, just because there's so many. And you're right, the timeline over that last 6 months matches up exactly with the intensification, the phase disruption that we saw in Valentina Zarkova's work. So it's exactly what we've been expecting, and yet it's just surreal to feel it all playing out. I don't know how that feels to you.
A little unnerving knowing that what we've seen in these last 6 months is literally 1/8 of where we need to go with the full changes by 2022. And then as we move forward into 2023, 25, somewhere around there when the real cold times will hit. And also when you spoke about us coming to our highest level and trying to do what we can on this planet, and we've seen in the media so far this whole divide and conquer mechanism that they're using through politics and so many other means at the moment. It's like I challenge also everybody out there to look at the news and notice that it's a distraction and divide and conquer technique, and pull those veils to the side. We need to come back together as a community. You need to be working with your neighbors. You need to be working with other people, regardless of their political beliefs. But the media is ripping us apart. And it is, I do believe, to distract you from everything that's going on with what Christian and I are talking about. These price rises are going to shatter the economy. They always do. I mean, if you have 100 extra US dollars at the end of the month, let's say, and suddenly you have to double or triple your food costs, everything else you were going to spend for movies, electronics, and all these other things that might be travel, it's going to get diverted to food. So a greater part of the economy is going to shrink. And while this is happening, since you've been brainwashed and fed and indoctrinated global warming for 40, 45 years, they're going to have to try to explain it away as something different, and they don't want you looking under the sheet over there. They're going to try to continually push you in a different direction. They're going to create so much fuzz and distraction out there. I really believe that's the purpose, to divide us and keep you distracted while all these crop losses go on, and they'll have an excuse for everything. Suddenly, global warming's responsible for record snow and record ice. Hot equals cold. Well, truth equals lies. Something like this as we move forward. And Christian, I know you've really been into calling out the media in terms of this very same issue.
The attempts to hide these things are myriad, right? We know that they have rigged markets, even the paper markets for trading things, there's computer trading that is masking a lot of the price sensitivity, but you can't hide the declining stocks. Even with all that manipulation, the prices are rising. The Guardian finally ran a piece this week about the beast from the east, which was 8 months ago now having some effects on the food prices going into the holidays, with potatoes having nearly doubled in price. And we already know that there are smaller potatoes because of those reports about the shorter French fries this year. In fact, one of the things that irks me about the media's coverage is that they'll frequently look at these events, which have very dire consequences, and then mask them in this weird sort of self-deprecating, it doesn't matter, it was just shorter French fries, or, I wish I had a better example handy, but it's very flippant, and I think it's because the media, which is sort of this collective voice of humanity, or it purports to be, it's the collective voice that the establishment wishes to have humanity saying life, but it can't come to grips with its own demise, with the image of the very life support system of humanity falling apart. And that's exactly what's happening. It is unsettling when you see that that phase disruption is only going to drastically increase. And when you look at how things have played out over the last 6 months and how nations have scurried to source grains, especially from anywhere else, like we saw the volume on the Chicago Board of Trade was more than double recently, because just lots of wheat trading hands. People are trying to find where they can get it now. And I think that's only going to increase, obviously. And then ultimately, I think when you look at the degree to which this is going to amplify and Zarkova's models, I don't know that, I mean, it's certainly modern agriculture, and transitively, I don't know that our way of life for many people can survive that.
Yeah, and I want to quickly jump to a story that I'd covered. It goes right into the wheat analysis. And when they did a full total of around the planet, there's just not enough wheat, and traditional exporters were actually holding back some of their exports this year. So they were looking to Argentina, because Argentina had, I think it was 1.5 million extra tons above their last year's harvest. So people were jumping over to Argentina, saying, look, this is okay, we got extra supply on the planet. But then, you look right back over at places like Russia that were 85 million tons last year, and they're down in the mid 70s this year. And across the planet, everywhere you look, all the suppliers are down in production. There's premiums on bushels now. So for the hard red winter wheat, and keep in mind, this is another thing I really want everybody to understand. When they talk about wheat in the media, not all wheat is created equal. The hard red winter wheat, that's the one we use for breads and pastas. And then you have the spring wheat, you have the animal feed wheat. But in the media reports, they just lump it all together as wheat. You, as a discerning media connoisseur, if you will, need to dissect that. Which type of wheat is it, and where are the losses? Because we as humans don't eat the stuff animals eat. We eat hard red winter wheat, soft white, and the things that are coming out for the spring wheat. So when you're getting a $2 premium per bushel, now what that means is what you were alluded to on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, when they're trading hands with millions of tons of wheat, the stuff we eat has been so crushed in its yield. It's down 80% this year just on the Kansas, Oklahoma area, for that's predominantly where this hard red comes from. Think about that in the United States, lost 80%. So there's not enough supply out there anymore for what was considered even last year just the free buy. You can take physical delivery. Now they're paying $2 a bushel premium on that to get it, just so they can have it. Now, that's not being traded in the traditional markets. That's what sellers are actually paying to the buyers in a different transaction to get that wheat to allow them to take delivery. That is insane. $2 extra per bushel just so you can get it. And, people are going to wake up eventually and say, whoa, we could double that price. And then where does it really go once we start to get into these? The producers can actually strong arm you into paying double price just because they have the supply, and you don't, and you need to pay anything to get it so your business can continue to run. This is where we're going.
Yeah, I think real quick, when that happens, we'll hit the point where nations just stop exporting and save the food for their own people. And, those numbers you mentioned, you have to dig a little bit to get to those numbers, but it's much easier. You can just look up today. Nestle's CEO announced that come 2019, so in a month, they'll be raising prices on many of their food products. And he mentioned, actually, he suggested this was both because consumers seem to be willing to pay a little bit more, which is nonsense, and that, namely, input costs were rising. So this is plain as day to see right now.
And some of the input costs, think about Nestle, you're talking about chocolate, termed the softs, S-O-F-T-S, it's different. Softs are things like coffee, cocoa, stuff like this. If these input costs are going up for the things that are affected most by temperature, can you imagine what's coming? Because I did an interview with Kevin Long. He's a forecaster who does Southeast Australia weather analysis for farmers down there. And he's saying Southeast Australia is going into a mega drought. and that is going to take Australian production down to 1 million tons or less moving forward. Now, you got to realize Australia is a main exporter, producer on our planet. If they're going to go down to that type of low yield, and then across the southern hemisphere, we find South Africa going offline due to politics. South Africa is a major exporter to other African nations, so they're going to be looking for other supply. And it's just going to be this moving, I guess, dominoes around a board somewhere until we just run out of supply. And then how many people are going to be unprepared, even though the signs were around you, talked about, it's in the media in certain places, and you do have to look for this or you won't find it. It's definitely not on the front page news. You're going to have to do some of your own research, follow a few links, and dig into it yourself. But just that scary interview I had with Kevin about Australian production down to less than 1 million tons, that's going to cut greatly into what the world supply is going to offer at this point moving forward.
Yeah, that was a great discussion, and people should definitely check it out. And I just want to talk about what you're mentioning there, where how many people aren't going to be knowing what to look at. And I think this is partly a function of this false dialogue that's been created around the AGW, right, global warming. And the problem there is that you either have people who are believers, who believe that the globe is warming, and as they witness these climate extreme events and the hail and the crop losses, they will be comfortable unthinkingly attributing these things and linking them. Although they don't perfectly fit, and there is some friction there, and I think there is an opportunity still to approach people who have been living in that world just because they don't have any awareness of reality. And so they might, I wouldn't give up on anyone. A lot of people begin as sheep and then wake up. I certainly did. And then as well, there are people who have rejected or just never accepted the whole global warming narrative. But that's where they stop. There isn't this, and I want to stress, there's a third option that we're talking about here, obviously, and that is that it is the sun that drives the climate, and we're at the precipice of this massive drop-off in solar activity and a change and a confluence of cycles and a whole host of other things. But namely, we need to really work to inject that third option actually into both sides of that equation. What do you think about that?
And I think once the discussion starts, we need to understand what the problem is, but then quickly thereafter, we need to start discussing solutions to this, because we just can't move grow zones. If everything moves 300 miles south as predicted for the edge of hospitable grow for certain ABC, whatever it is, crops out there, once they shift south, to set up an entirely new logistics system to get the seeds there, to get the processors in place, that's going to take more than a decade. It's not going to happen overnight. And the way I try to bring the discussion, even though people are really, I heard it's the warmest year ever, the news said it. I just simply ask a question in a non-condescending manner because I really want to start the discussion. So what I usually ask is, awesome, I heard the globe is cooling, but where are you finding your data sets for the temperatures on our planet? Now, most of them don't have an answer, right? They won't know anything. And I'll say, are you using remote sensing systems? Are you using GISS? Are you using University of Alabama, Huntsville, the UAH data set? Which one of the satellite sets are you using to come to this conclusion? And right there, they're shocked that they don't have the answer, yet you do. And then generally, I'll just let it go from there. And I'll say, well, if you're going to tell me that global warming's real and I'm the one who's wrong, you got to be able to direct me at least to a temperature data site so I can look it up myself. And then generally 99% cannot even come back with a single response during that time. And then from there, you could just say, well, I get this information from this place and, let's take a look at it. And you see this and then it drops. And then generally they're like, really, I never knew that. And that's how I try to, bring it in without causing the friction of you're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. It's just an easier way to start and then continue dialogue. But with that said, we need solutions.
That's actually a brilliant way to disarm first, and then just to calmly and unemotionally present some of that data is really, really the key. You mentioned that you wanted to talk about the social media censorship. I kind of want to, if it's all right, hop there, because I've worked in that space, and there's a lot of other stuff that I'd enjoy talking about. But I think that there's a lot of distraction. In fact, you mentioned as well, there's a lot of distractions, and I do expect that to continue. But it's really impressed upon me tonight that we need to speak to why this censorship is popping up and how it's going to play out.
By all means, head it off. Let's see let's go.
So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people who, Alex Jones got dropped, and then a bunch of people, 400, I think, odd pages and whatnot got cut last week. And everyone sort of talks about it and then moves on to the next adrenaline rush. And maybe that's expected, or maybe that's just a function of the way that the alternative media sort of works and runs from thing to see to thing to see, or just the pace of things these days. But this needs to be discussed. The open platforms, as they've called themselves and acted for some time now, are now openly talking about curation, even as they're wiping reality from view. And the media, we know, has already gone all in against reality. They've been hardcore supporting global warming and all sorts of other false parts of reality, right? The globalism narrative and all these things. And that's why we're seeing the media empires collapse as alt media has moved in with reality. But that alternative media depends on the internet. And so actually the marriage of the fact that these tech companies and these media companies come from the same place is really a problem. And so this is actually a huge turning point for the internet, and I would argue actually for humanity as we know it, this whole confluence of things. If our information sources collapse, it's really dangerous. People who don't know what's going on, and there's a lot of those already, we know they're dangerous. So yeah, let's do a deep dive on this. I think there's a lot at play here. The reason it's relevant, I think it's clear, the reason it's relevant to this conversation is because climate truth is absolutely on that same chopping block of censorship. We are a direct threat to the global warming agenda, and as we've been saying, what's going on in the world is it's getting more and more obvious by the day. You can't just have $3 billion of crops under snow and not wonder what's going on, or to call it global warming. These things, there's cognitive dissonance there that I think presents the opportunity for us to get in there and help people come to the right conclusions. And they're looking around now because of that. It's definitely already obvious to farmers. I'm hearing from lots of those folks, they're really in touch with the land. And so they get these things firsthand. The patterns are shifting, the extremes of dry and wet, the shorter growing seasons, these things, plus just the general understanding of natural cycles in history, all of these things really mean that it's increasingly obvious what's going on. And the reality of global cooling and of the grand solar minimum is, I think, clear to any rational thinking person if, and this is the huge if they can find that data. And it's for that reason that they now have to come and scrub this off the accessible, visible internet. Right now, this IPCC report is a big deal. And they've, I don't know if you saw Al Gore come out and openly said, I did a video about this today because it's just, I'm disgusted by the man. He openly said the language in that IPCC report was torqued up to actually get a response from people. And so he openly admits that they lied. They amplified the language. They changed the facts. And we know the data is fake from the ground up. So the whole thing is just a farce. And then they come up with torqued up language. And the media is all too happy to take that. And literally, these are quotes, printed headlines, "We're all going to die," "fiery hothouse effect on Earth." And they talk about the tipping point, although we've heard about the tipping point for the better part of 2 decades now. So I want to come back to that IPCC report and how it's now being used. But I mean, David, you gotta bear in mind that we've already seen the media come out even ahead of the tech companies, although they're aligned ultimately quite deeply. And we saw leaked internal guidance from the BBC and from USA Today. There was some editorial policy, and they were both confirming that climate deniers are no longer to be given a voice whatsoever. We can talk about how to solve calling of global warming, but we cannot debate its existence. So the media is already clamped down, and these tech companies are not going to be far behind. Did you see Media Matters calling for climate deniers to be kicked off Facebook already?
I have, and the lexicon of a denier, I really disagree you using those terms because, A, it's a trigger word, Holocaust denier, climate denier. Anytime you're a denier of something, it puts you into that realm. But see, the gray area that exists, I used to buy coffee in Myanmar, and we experienced cold weather losses down on the farms for a couple of years. This is back in 2012, 13. So I did my research, to understand what was happening with the cold. Now, I used to be the biggest global warming believer out there. I believed it was from CO2. But now doing more research and, from that point of buying coffee and understanding why it was getting cold in Burma, places that are on the equator down there, it cycles in the sun. Now, I am the biggest proponent that our climate is changing so fast that it's going to disrupt our society. I'm a climate change believer to the uber. Yet because I don't believe in CO2, I'm labeled a climate denier. See, this is where it gets into this gray area of, wait a second, we're talking about the exact same thing. Because you don't believe in the causation of the outcome, then you're a denier. And this, is going to come right into, if you explain the weather and the crop losses in a real way that, the sun's causing it, you're going to have to deal with it, we're going to need solutions. That also threatens the government power structure of trying to keep civil unrest under control by limiting how you can spread information. Do you think during food riots across, let's say, United States, that they're going to let people communicate from city to city about what's going on and, communicate where the food deliveries are rolling down the rails or on the highways? At some point, they're going to lock down communication just because they're going to try to protect their continuity of government. As we see in Venezuela, the exact same thing is coming to the rest of the world. Venezuela is a very interesting place to watch, not only because of the socialist communists down there, but also to see how the media has been so controlled and how they've limited citizens. I have considered buying a ham radio, getting my license, and then using a ham radio broadcast to put out the same information in the event that our mediums go down on the internet. Because you can't tell me, with the new switchover, with all the the ICANN protocols and everything switching through the net this year, and the link tax that the EU is talking about, and all these other things that are happening across the European Union to dictate what the rest of the world can do with the internet, is all happening in the same year, at the same time, with the amplification of all these events, and it's somehow just random happenstance. I just can't believe that. They're getting ready to cut communication so you don't realize what's going on and the real causes. They're going to try to preserve themselves, because if us, the rest of the world, the citizens of the world, wake up and realize they've been lied to for 40 years and they have been not given a chance to prepare, they're going to be wanting heads on a platter, just like they did in France in the 17th century. Nobody's going to be safe that was putting out this information about you're trying to keep the media distracted and not let us prepare. And you had this information for 40 years and my family's starving and you didn't let us prepare. Oh, you're going to have a lot of angry people out there. So I think they're trying to keep their safety intact, the continuity of government intact, control the narrative, and keep these same overseers or gatekeepers intact at the same time. So the masses will not look elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. They have no intention of letting any of that get out. And that's why, just for those of you keeping score at home, the Media Matters article was called "Facebook Has a Climate Denial Problem." And David, I couldn't agree more about I would call it not just a gray zone in the wording. I think that is weaponized language that is used to keep folks off the scent here. But yeah, that piece goes on to say, Facebook is a well-known breeding ground for misinformation. It has a particular problem with disseminating false and misleading messages about climate change. Mark Zuckerberg talks the talk about climate change, but he doesn't walk the walk. He needs to use the immense power of his platform to halt misinformation about climate change. So they're openly calling to start the banning. And I think that's probably already in place. There's we've seen the shadow banning and stuff like that. I would suggest that they've already turned down the volume of our signal quite a bit, but outright banning is what they want. So with the removal only, like I said, 2 weeks ago, of a huge wave of pages, including that right-wing news, which had 3 million likes, I think they're just one step closer to actually pulling that through. And they have support from, there was an editorial in Nature Communications Journal, which was called "Fake News Threatens a Climate Literate World." There have been open letters from policymakers and politicians in The Guardian saying, they can have their free speech, but we do not need to give climate deniers a platform. So there's unison from everywhere, from the establishment right now, calling for this to be silenced. Even YouTube was called out by the media watchdogs for spreading misinformation, hence the information blurbs that are now in effect as of a few months ago, but beneath your videos and beneath mine. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, hey, why is YouTube putting in the blurb of Wikipedia under your video? Or even that blurb makes it really obvious that what you're saying is important, if not true, right? It's actually working against them. I think it's counterproductive. And for that reason, I would actually suggest also that it's going to go away completely. We're in an awkward in-between stage where we haven't yet been outright censored, but there's clearly already some algorithm detecting what we're talking about and slapping a warning on there. Viewers, don't listen to these people.